Hi folks, welcome to the weekend. I trust that you've had a productive week one way or another. Let's get straight to it with what have I been reading this week. I finished Newton's Wake by Ken MacLeod. There is a lot going on in this book and I struggled a bit to keep it straight in my head, to be honest. At some point in the past, humans were devastated by a military AI takeover. Think Skynet, and you won't be far wrong, but with added assimilation of humans into some form of post-human AI mashup that left Earth in something called the hard rapture, going who knows where, but leaving relics behind along the way. What's left of humanity is split into many factions. There's America offline, essentially farmers who shun most forms of technology. There's the Knights of Enlightenment, who seem to be mainly Japanese or East Asian in origin, I think. And then there's the Democratic Communist Union, who seem to emanate from North Korea, with hangers-on from the region. And then there's the Carlisle clan, a group of Scottish black marketeers who also control the Skene, a network of portals or wormholes. And if that wasn't enough, there's a long-lost colony of humans on the planet Eurydice who are doing very nicely, thank you very much. And that's not even all of the factions. There were things that I liked about this book. The main character, Lucinda Carlisle, is enjoyably no-nonsense and still speaking in what seems to me to be a broad Glaswegian accent. She is a combat archaeologist. She and her team seek out relics with the objective of exploiting them for gain, and they go about doing that armed to the teeth. I like some of the terminology. MacLeod talks of spaceships fiddling in and out, and for a while I assumed that fiddling was a dialect word meaning move or something, and then it dawned on me that he'd made a verb of the abbreviation FTL. Dol. Mainly I felt like Newton's Wake was just a bit of a jumble. Maybe I tried to read it too quickly, or maybe it just wasn't for me. I think that it would be too strong to say that it was disappointing, but I guess it didn't meet my expectations, which were pretty elevated after mainly enjoying the Full Revolution books. So we'll chalk up Newton's Wake as a bit of a miss and move on. Wanting something to clear my head a bit, I decided to read Dark Matter next by Blake Crouch. And this is a proper page turner, an airport thriller, some might say, with some science fiction trimmings. The protagonist, Jason Desson, is happy enough with his so-so academic career, having forgone his cutting-edge research in favour of his young wife and son. And one day he's abducted on the way home from a bar, and thus begins a cascade of parallel world action. I won't try to outline the plot. Suffice to say that there are a lot of parallel worlds, some of them really messed up. And Jason's objective is to get back to his own world and oust the version of himself that has taken his place. As you'd expect from a thriller, the pacing is good, and I enjoyed the tension and the jeopardy and the variety of worlds that Jason visits to try to find his way back home. I enjoyed the mid-plot twist, which I didn't really see coming, and I'll leave that to you to find if you haven't read it. This is not a demanding book. I burned through it in a few hours and had fun while I was there. I don't think it will linger in the mind for very long, but it was fun. Next, I dipped briefly into the space opera Renaissance, a book that tracks the origin, evolution and resurgence of space opera throughout the 20th century. So this book is right up my alley as a fan of space opera. The book is mostly short stories and novellas that illustrate the thrust of the author's argument, which they lay out in full in the introduction to the book. And that's the only part that I've actually read so far, and maybe all I'll read this month, but it has teed up the anthology very nicely indeed. On audiobook, I finished Century Reign by Alistair Reynolds, one of the few books of his that I haven't actually read before, and I really enjoyed it. There are two plot threads which start quite separately but get more connected as the book progresses before ultimately collapsing into a single thread. There's a detective noir element set in 1959 Paris, and we rapidly become aware that this is a different Paris in a different 1959 to the one that we know. World War II didn't happen, or rather it did, but Nazi Germany was defeated on the French border. No war means no technology advances, so we're kind of stuck in the 1930s as that kind of thing goes. The main character in this timeline is Wendell Floyd, an American actually, a failed musician and a part-time private investigator that's lived in Paris for many years. He and his partner, an ex-cop, are engaged to investigate a suspicious death. Their client is Monsieur Blanchard, and the elderly friend and landlord of the victim, a Susan White. There's lots of black and white movie feels to this thread. I half imagined Humphrey Bogart playing Floyd. There's a lot of clue finding and chasing down leads, mysterious children seen in the vicinity, bootleg records and other strange documents. The police aren't interested in the case. In their view, it's obviously a suicide. And then the other thread is set 200 or 300 years in our future. Earth has been devastated by something called the nanocaust, and what remains of humanity live elsewhere in the solar system, the descendants of the few that were not on the surface of the planet at the time of the nanocaust. There are two main groups or factions in this thread. The threshers mainly live in Tanglewood, a halo of habitats orbiting Earth, which was very reminiscent, I thought, of the glitter band around Yellowstone in the Revelation space books, although on a smaller, less impressive scale, I think. The slashers live further out, embracing the feared nanotechnology to enhance their health, longevity, perceptions, processing power, you name it. The threshers and the slashers have fought at least one messy war and are on the brink of another. And there's also a network of portals, relics of some distant and long dead advanced alien civilization. Anyway, the main character from this thread is Verity Auger, and we first meet her on Earth on an archaeological dig in a frozen Paris. One of her party, a young person, is injured on her watch and later dies, and she's held responsible and faces trial and jail time. She's offered a way out by a shady secret agency, and to cut a long story short, Auger ends up being sent via the portal network to Floyd's version of Paris to continue the work of Susan White, the murdered lady who was also, it turns out, an agent. There ensues much chaos and mayhem and planetary peril for the world of Floyd's Paris. I really enjoyed the noir aspects of the book, and the elements set in our future were interesting too. And I thought Reynolds did a good job of knitting it all together. If I was being super critical, I might argue that it was a bit long. There was an opportunity to wrap it up sooner than he did, but that obviously would have been a different book and it would have left a lot of the tale untold. Overall, it was very good, and I'm surprised that it's taken me 20 years to get around to reading it. Actually, going back to Newton's Wake, one of my challenges whilst reading that was that while I was reading it, I was listening concurrently to Century Rain on audio, but not at the same time, obviously, but during the same period of time. And there are some similar plot elements, and at times I think they just merged in my head, which was making it more difficult than it already was to stay on track with Newton's Wake. I've also made a start on Marrow, which is the first of the Great Ship books by Robert Reed. I'm about 100 pages in and I'm enjoying it. So more on that next week. For my next audiobook listen, I discovered that Yoon-Ha Lee's short story collection is available to listen for free on Audible, and it's a handy way to cheat my way through some of my remaining TBR pile for May. I've listened to the first 3 minutes about 5 times. For some reason, I just haven't been able to get my ear in. I do remember the 9 Fox Gambit books, and this is set in the same universe as that, were hard going at first. There's no allowance made for the reader. There's no exposition. You have to work it all out, building a picture gradually in your head of what's going on. And perhaps there's an element of that going on with this one too. Anyway, I've abandoned the audiobook, and I think this one might be better read as a physical book. So I will pick this up when I finish Marrow. After my experience with the Anne McCaffrey book the other week, I'm not going to give it too much time. It is short story, so it ought to be bite-sized and easy enough to read. We'll see how I get on. On audio, not so much, but perhaps the physical book will be a different beast. So having ditched the Yoon-Ha Lee book, I've instead picked up on audiobook Gregory Benford's In the Ocean of Night, which is the first of the Galactic Centre books. I've only listened to a few chapters. It's early days, but so far, so good. Overall, I'd call that a pretty good reading week. Overall, I think that's a pretty good reading week. Tell me, what have you read this week? Is there anything that you'd particularly recommend? Do let us know in the comments down below. Channel stuff next then. Subscribers are at 2,789, which is up 26 on last week. And if you're one of those 26, or if you've stumbled across my channel for the first time today, then a big welcome to you. I'm John, and I read, collect and waffle on about science fiction books, old and new. Comment of the week was from Bazoo, who responded to the Scottish video from last week, pointing out, for any that weren't aware, that Ian Banks obviously also wrote non-science fiction books, and he was keen to ensure that we all remembered that whilst those are not science fiction, strictly speaking, some of them do contain science fiction or fantastical elements, and it's really worth watching out for those. Thank you to Bazoo for taking the time to make that comment, and to all of you that take time to make a comment on any of my videos. I much appreciate it, and I try to read and respond to all of them. Let's take a look at what was on the channel this week. On Sunday, there was a look at science fiction hailing from Scotland, the aforementioned Scotland, my national neighbour here in the UK. There were some officially Scottish authors, and then some of their books, and then a few more that have made Scotland their home. I really enjoyed researching this video. I do like picking a theme and then finding the books that fit. Maybe I'll do a bit of a world tour. Canada next, perhaps? On Tuesday, there was another bookshelf audit. I hadn't really planned to post that this week, as it was only 10 days since the last one. But to be candid, I hadn't actually got around to making a new video, so this one filled a gap in the schedule. The first one got a fair amount of views, but it has tailed off in the second, and even more so in the third video. There is one more to go, which I will edit a bit more fiercely so that it's shorter. From my perspective, the exercise has been fruitful. I've cleared piles and piles of books from my shelves, making lots of room for what I hope and trust will be more deserving books. Now, I'm busy selling the books that I've removed from my shelves. In fact, I'll put the link for the eBay listing in the description for this video. By default, it's restricted to the UK, but if you're happy to pay the international postage, you can add items to basket and then ask me to quote for the postage, or you can just email me with what you want and we can work something out. Yesterday, there was a longer review of Lord Valentine's Castle, a book that I've very much enjoyed this month. I rather cheekily asked if it's better than Tolkien. Probably it isn't, but I do think that Silverberg gives him a pretty good run for his money. So what have I watched this week? I watched Richard over at Vintage SF share some books that he bought recently at a charity book sale. There's some great books in that haul, including some nice hardback first editions. And I also watched Ira run through quite a stack of books that he's acquired over the last few weeks. Again, plenty to cover in there. It's clearly time for a book haul. I also watched Steve over at Outlaw Bookseller do an overview of Chris Beckett's work. There were some handsome editions in that to cover. I have a bunch of Beckett's books, but there are still several for me to find. Finally, I watched Robin over at Booksbin tier rank the Hugo winning novels since the year dot, I think. That was an interesting video, and I'm going to borrow the software that he used for that in my future tier ranking videos, I think. In the book buying department, I continue to put my modest eBay sales revenue to good use. I bought a bunch of mint condition hardbacks from one seller, all from the early 1990s, I think. And I was also delighted to receive 3 books from viewers of this channel. And earlier today, I popped over to my local Aladdin's Cave of used science fiction books to see what they had. Answer, not much. But anyway, the current tally of not yet hauled books is 39. So we're getting ready to do a bumper book haul, and all shall be revealed soon. Looking ahead to the coming week, on Sunday there will be a look at the golden age of science fiction. The first task that I'll have is to try to define what that even means, because it depends really who you ask. And I'll look at some of the authors that came up during that period, the foundational ideas that they had, the sci-fi notions that we still love now, which emerged for the first time back then, and of course some of the books too. I say Sunday, there's a lot of work for me yet to do on that video, so maybe it won't happen until Monday or Tuesday, we shall see. Safe to say at some point in the coming week there will be some hot golden age action. There will also be a collection overview, a closer look at an author and the books of theirs that I have in my library. I have a few options there and I'll just pick one. I'll probably also unleash that pent up book haul video, and like I said, it's going to be a doozy, so you should strap in. I think it's going to be a really good one. There's lots of interesting books, and I think in general it's a more curated set of books, more carefully selected, less random magpie purchases, and plus, as I mentioned, some that have been very kindly sent to me by fans, believe it or not, of this channel. I'm really looking forward to making that video. I do love a good book haul. For my reading in the coming week, I'll finish up Marrow, and I'll probably finish In the Ocean of Night. Maybe I will, maybe I won't quite make it for next Friday, we'll see. And then once I finish Marrow, I'll either pick up the other Wind, which is the Ursula K. Le Guin book that's on my TBR pile, or I'll try that Yoon Ha Lee short story collection again. As always, thank you for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and until next time, goodbye for now.